SRA is essentially a set of reference architectures, right? So they're saying, hey, if you're building a system like this, then here's a reference architecture for you to set up your system in that manner. So they pretty much provide these blueprints or architecture diagrams of how you should where you should put everything and how they should be organized. So they actually had these. They had a bunch of patterns. They were called multi-account patterns. So in 2017, when they launched organizations, they had that. And then it's funny because I remember a couple of years ago, I kept looking for those patterns because I wanted to recommend them to some of our clients. I'm like, hey, where is the pattern for the shared service account? Where's the pattern for, multi-account and all that stuff? Guess what happened is they took them out of in their patterns, wherever it was, repository, and they created this security. They just changed the name essentially, right? These things were there before, but they were just presented as like, hey, here's a bunch of patterns that you can use. But now they formalized it and they're calling it the reference architecture. So just to be clear, these are exactly what the name suggests, right? These are a handful of reference architectures that you could refer to so that you could build your environment in according to those ones. Like, for example, they'll have a reference architecture. If you look at, there's the shared services account, and it basically shows a diagram that says, hey, if you have a bunch of shared services, like for example, the directory service or AWS config or guard duty or things like that are shared across all of your AWS accounts, put them in a shared services account, right? What they also say is that don't overdo it. Like, don't go and create a whole bunch of AWS accounts and, like, for example, put the security stuff in one, put the IT in another. That's great if you're a really large company, but the Amazon says start small. So don't all of a sudden get really like account happy and then go, hey, they have this multi-account thing. I'm going to make lots of accounts and segregate everything. Give it some thought, right? Like, if you're a small company, definitely a single account should not be used, right? Like, what we see a lot is that most companies they'll create one AWS account and then they'll put like a VPC for their production, and then they'll set up a VPC for their staging, and then they'll set up one for dev, right? All in the same AWS account. You should not do that. Like, at a minimum, even if you're a small company, you should have one master account and then a child account, probably two. One child account would have your prod workload, and then a second one would have what I would call shared IT and security, right? And then you can at least have that separation. Probably a good idea to have another one as well for your staging. The reason being is that imagine if your staging and production are in the same AWS account, and then you give one of your developers access into that AWS account because they need to go and fix bugs and do things. Well, guess what? Because staging is in the same account as your production, now that developer might have too much access and be able to gain access to the workloads that are in that same account that are doing production work, right? But if you put them in different AWS accounts, whatever access you provision to that person to go in that AWS account and work on the staging debugging would be nicely segregated from the production account, right? In fact, I had to do that the other day for our own company. One of our developers wanted to go and do some testing in AWS, and then he needed some access, and I was like, oh, I could go and create give you an admin permission, but then I realized that account has some sensitive stuff in it. So what I did is I just remembered Amazon's recommendation that you should always separate, AWS accounts are free, just make another one and then put all the testing stuff in there, which is what I did. So something to be cognizant of. And these patterns are there as a reference. Take a look, and then, doesn't have to be implemented exactly as is. You can modify them to suit your need, right? And just remember that what I was mentioning earlier, don't make it complicated. Don't overdo it. Don't create too many accounts. Start small and grow from there.